I want you to picture a scenario. You spend a literal fortune building this high-tech security system for your neighbor's house.
Okay.
I'm talking reinforced baits, motion sensors, cameras on every corner, the works. You even park your own security car right in their driveway to manage it all. But then a burglar actually shows up at the end of the street. You reach for the control panel to flip on the floodlights and lock the gates, and your neighbor slaps your hand away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they tell you, whoa, stop. You can't turn that on. I don't want to upset the burglar.
That is a frustratingly accurate analogy.
Right.
And it captures exactly what is happening right now in one of the most volatile regions on Earth.
Right.
You build the infrastructure for power, you spend billions on it, but when the moment comes to use it, you find out you don't actually hold the keys.
We are talking, of course, about the Persian Gulf. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a really sharp analysis by Suat Delcan,
He's a former Turkish naval warfare officer and a defense analyst.
which I think is so important because he's looking at this from a NATO perspective, but one that's geographically much closer to the action than Washington.
Right. He's looking at the mechanics of the alliance, not just the talking points. And his argument is pretty stark. He says the U.S. military bases in the Gulf fail. These massive symbols of American reach are effectively being deactivated by the host countries.
Deactivated is a very strong word, though. I mean, we aren't seeing troops getting kicked out, are we?
No, and that's the nuance here. The hardware is there, the troops are there, but the political permission to use them for offensive operations, that has completely evaporated.
So they're just stuck.
Exactly. We are seeing long-standing allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE telling the Pentagon, you can stay, but you can't launch from here.
Which creates this massive strategic bind for the military. So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out why. Why are countries that rely on the U.S. for protection blocking U.S. operations during such a critical time?
We really need to unpack the legal hierarchy of these alliances too, because apparently not all friends are created equal in the eyes of the U.S.
Right. We need to look at what this means for the future of American power. Is this just a temporary glitch because of the war in Gaza, or are we watching the end of an era?
I lean toward the latter. But to understand the no, you really have to understand the paperwork.
The paperwork. It always comes down to the fine print, doesn't it?
It really does. We tend to lump all the Gulf monarchies into one big bucket and just label it U.S. allies. They have oil, they buy American jets, they host American bases.
Sure.
But Delcan points out that the U.S. State Department actually have a very strict caste system for these relationships. It's based on Defense Cooperation Agreements, or DCAs.
Okay, let's break down this caste system, because I was genuinely surprised by this. I just assumed Saudi Arabia, given the history, the oil, the sheer size of the country, was at the very top of the VIP list.
You would think so. But under U.S. law, they are actually second tier. The magic term you need to know here is MNA.
MNNA, Major Non-NATO Ally.
Exactly. This is a specific legal designation that was created in the late 80s. It's basically the VIP club for countries that aren't in NATO. So they aren't covered by the North Atlantic Treaty, but the U.S. wants to treat them like family.
Think Japan, Australia, South Korea, Israel.
Right, those are the classic examples.
Okay, so that's the gold standard globally. Who actually has that badge in the Gulf?
In the Persian Gulf, the VIP list is Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar.
And who is stuck in general admission?
The big players. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. They are not major non-NATO allies.
That seems almost counterintuitive to me. Why would the U.S. keep the Saudis and Emiratis out of the club?
It's a mix of history and politics. A lot of it originally had to do with Israel. For decades, Congress was very hesitant to grant that specific status to Arab states that didn't have normalized relations with Israel.
Oh, good.
But the practical result is a two-track system. And Delcan argues this legal distinction is totally crucial to understanding the friction we are seeing right now.
Okay, but let's push back on that just a bit. Is this just a plaque on the wall? Does being an MNNA actually change anything on the ground, or is it just diplomatic fluff?
Oh, it changes the logistics of war significantly.
Yeah.
If you are an MNNA, you get priority access to excess defense articles.
Which means what exactly?
It means if the U.S. Army is downsizing and has 500 spare Humvees or generators or logistics trucks, you get first dibs before anyone else in the world.
That's a huge perk.
It is. More importantly, it allows the U.S. to stockpile its own war reserves on your territory.
So pre-positioning gear for a future conflict.
Exactly. It creates a tripwire effect.
Yeah.
If an enemy attacks you, they're literally blowing up U.S. property. It also allows for purchasing very sensitive technology. Delgin specifically mentions depleted uranium munitions.
Whoa, pause there for a second. Depleted uranium. That sounds heavy. Why is that on the list?
It's controversial because of the health concerns and radiation, obviously.
Yeah.
But from a purely military perspective, it is the absolute gold standard for anti-armor. It's an incredibly dense metal. If you need to punch through a modern tank, you want depleted uranium rounds. The U.S. doesn't sell that to just anyone. You have to be in the inner circle.
So Kuwait and Qatar get the keys to the warehouse and the heavy hitters. And Saudi Arabia and the UAE are basically stuck waiting in line.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But, and this is the huge caveat that Delgin highlights, even MNNA status is not a security guarantee.
Right, it's not Article 5.
Correct. Article 5 of NATO says an attack on one is an attack on all. If Russia invades France, the U.S. is legally bound to fight. If Iran invades Kuwait, the U.S. is not legally bound to fight, even though Kuwait is an MNNA.
So if you're Saudi Arabia or the UAE, you're looking at this deal and thinking, I don't get the VIP perks, and I don't get a guarantee that you'll save me if things go south.
Exactly. And for a long time, that ambiguity was fine because everyone just assumed the U.S. would come to the rescue as this unwritten rule.
But now,
the calculation has completely changed. They're looking at the risks of hosting U.S. bases versus the rewards, and the math just isn't adding up anymore.
and that brings us to the not from our bases policy, because this isn't theoretical anymore. Since October 7th, the Hamas attacks and the subsequent war in Gaza, these countries have moved from passive complaints to active blocking.
It's a heartbreak. And we really need to be specific about what they are blocking, because it's not everything. They aren't kicking the troops out. They are saying no offensive operations.
Delgin lists a couple of operations that got the red light. Let's walk the listener through them. First is Operation Guardian of Prosperity.
Which sounds like a very optimistic name.
It really does. But this was the naval coalition to protect shipping in the Red Sea, right?
Yes. Back in December 2023, the Houthis on Sarala in Yemen started firing missiles at cargo ships. The U.S. wanted to build this massive global coalition to patrol the waters and asked the Saudis and the UAE to join.
Oh.
And they ghosted. Saudi Arabia and the UAE effectively sat it out. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a U.S.-led military branding in the Red Sea.
Then came Operation Poseidon Archer.
That was the shift from defense to offense. The U.S. and UK decided they couldn't just shoot down Houthi missiles forever. They needed to bomb the launch sites in Yemen.
And this is where geography gets really tricky. Because to bomb Yemen, the absolute easiest place to launch from is
Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Both are right there.
Right.
But Riyadh and Abu Dhabi said absolutely not. They refused to allow U.S. bases on their soil to be used for strikes into Yemen.
I want to give you, the listener, a real sense of scale here. When we say U.S. bases in these countries, what are we actually talking about? Are these just a few tents and a runway?
Oh, no. We are talking about massive, entrenched military cities. Take Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE.
Okay.
This place hosts the 380th Air Expeditionary Wing. We're talking over 3,500 U.S. personnel. It's where the U.S. keeps the MQ-9 Reaper drones, the high-altitude surveillance assets, and often advanced fighter jets like F-35s or F-22s.
That's huge.
It also hosts the Gulf Air Warfare Center. This is a crown jewel of U.S. power projection in the region.
And then you have Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia.
Right, another 2,700 troops there. Patriot missile batteries, advanced fighters. These aren't temporary outposts. These are billion-dollar investments.
So picture this. You have a squadron of F-22s sitting on the tarmac at Al Dhafra. The pilots are ready. The targets in Yemen are identified. And the Emirati government basically says, keep the engines off.
That is exactly what happened. Politico reported that the UAE explicitly restricted the Pentagon from conducting retaliatory airstrikes against Iran's proxies from their soil. So the U.S. had to scramble.
What does scramble look like in this context? If you can't use the massive land base, where do you even go?
You go to the sea.
Yeah.
The U.S. had to rely almost entirely on the aircraft carrier Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Which is formidable, sure. It's basically a floating city.
It is, but it's highly inefficient compared to a land base. A carrier has limited fuel for the jets, limited ammo storage, and the pilots have to fly much longer sorties from way out at sea.
That's exhausting.
It puts massive wear and tear on the Navy. And all because the unsinkable aircraft carriers, the land bases, were suddenly off limits.
Why, though? I mean, I get that they are mad about Gaza. We see the protests. We know the Arab Street is furious about U.S. support for Israel. But is this just about public opinion? Or is there a colder, harder strategy at play here?
It's survival. Pure and simple. Delgin argues it's about the glass house theory.
The glass house.
Think about the skyline of Dubai or Abu Dhabi, Or the massive oil refineries in Saudi Arabia. These are shiny, hyper-modern, incredibly expensive static targets.
And very fragile.
Exactly. Now look across the water at Iran, or down south at the Houthis. What do they have? They have cheap, mass-produced drones and ballistic missiles. It is a terrifying asymmetry of vulnerability.
So if the UAE lets the U.S. launch a strike on Iran from Al Dhafra,
Iran has made it very clear, we won't shoot back at Washington, D.C., we'll shoot back at Dubai.
and the UAE has a lot more to lose in that exchange. A drone hitting a skyscraper in Dubai destroys their entire economic model.
The tourism, the business, the
That's
stability.
exactly. The U.S. can pack up its aircraft carrier and sail away. The
Yeah.
UAE can't move its skyscrapers.
Yeah.
There's also the Yemen factor specifically. I think people forget that Saudi Arabia and the UAE were fighting a brutal war there for almost a decade.
And they effectively lost. Or at least they realized they couldn't win militarily. It was a complete quagmire. It drained their treasuries, it ruined their international reputations, and they were getting hit with incoming missiles constantly.
So they've been trying to get out of that mess.
Desperately. Just before this current crisis, in February, the Saudi foreign minister explicitly stated that a peace deal with the Houthis was close. They were right at the finish line.
So if they let the U.S. use their bases to bomb the Houthis now,
They blow up their own peace deal. They drag themselves back into a war they just spent years trying to escape. So when the U.S. says, hey, can we use your driveway to start a fight with the neighbor you just made a truce with? The answer is a very hard no.
it makes complete sense. It's frustrating for the Pentagon, I'm sure, but strategically, from the Gulf perspective, it's the only rational choice.
And we have to remember, the U.S. hasn't exactly made it easy for them either. We have to talk about the escalation risks. Since October, U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria have been attacked over 170 times.
170. That is relentless.
It is. Drones, rockets. 3 U.S. service members were killed in Jordan. The region is a total powder keg. If you are the Saudi crown prince, you are looking at this and thinking, the U.S. is stumbling into a regional war with Iran, and I am not going to be the launch pad for it.
This really feels like a turning point. We aren't just talking about a temporary disagreement over one policy. Delgin's analysis suggests we are seeing the symptoms of a multipolar world actually arriving.
That word gets thrown around a lot in think tanks, multipolarity. But this right here is what it looks like in practice. It's about having options.
Right.
For 50 years, the Gulf states had exactly one option for security, and that was the United States. It was a monopoly. Now they are hedging their bets. They are realizing the U.S. security guarantee might actually be a security liability.
Liability. That's a heavy shift in perspective.
Well, if hosting U.S. troops makes you a target rather than keeping you safe, why host them? So they are looking elsewhere. They are diversifying their portfolio, so to speak.
And who is waiting in the wings? I assume we're talking about China.
The dragon in the room. China is playing this very quietly, but very effectively. Delgin points out that China isn't trying to replace the U.S. military. They aren't going to put a massive base in Riyadh tomorrow.
They don't want the headache of being the world police.
Exactly. They don't want to be the policeman. But they are offering an alternative diplomatic architecture. Do you remember March 2023?
The handshake.
The handshake heard around the world. China mediated the peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
I remember seeing those photos. It was the Chinese diplomats standing right in the middle, smiling. Not a single American in the room.
That was a seismic shock to Washington. The assumption for decades was always nothing big happens in the Gulf without the U.S. China proved that completely wrong. And notice the sheer difference in style.
Right, because the U.S. usually comes with a list of demands.
Exactly. The U.S. says, fix your human rights, don't talk to Russia, support Israel, and maybe we'll sell you some jets.
And China says,
Let's do business. We'll buy your oil, we'll build your ports, we'll mediate your disputes, no moral lectures, no strings attached.
that is a highly tempting offer if you're a leader in the Gulf looking to modernize your economy and stay out of a regional war.
Especially right now, because the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel and Gaza, despite the massive civilian death toll, has made the American brand completely toxic on the Arab street. Arab leaders have to worry about their own domestic stability above all else. They can't be seen as puppets of a power that is enabling the destruction in Gaza.
Delgin actually suggests in the analysis that China might be planning another big move.
He does. He thinks China, maybe with Russia's help, is just waiting for the perfect moment to launch a massive peace initiative for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Totally free of U.S. interference.
Right. If the U.S. is seen globally as the warmonger, constantly blocking ceasefires at the UN, China can swoop in and step up as the responsible peacemaker. If they actually pull that off, U.S. prestige in the region takes a massive, maybe permanent, hit.
Okay, let's synthesize this for you, the listener. We have a legal structure, the MNNA status, that already treats these key allies as second tier. We have a war in Gaza that makes military cooperation politically suicidal for Arab leaders. We have a severe vulnerability problem where their modern cities are glass houses surrounded by cheap drones. And we have a major competitor, China, offering a no-drama alternative.
It is the definition of a perfect storm for U.S. strategy.
So what actually happens to the base is we have these massive multi-billion-dollar installations. Do we just pack up and go home?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. Delgen calls it a soft eviction. They aren't kicking the U.S. out. They still want the Americans there as a shield, as a tripwire to deter a full-scale Iranian invasion, but they absolutely don't want the U.S. there as a sword.
You can stay, but you can't fight.
Which forces the Pentagon to rethink its entire global strategy. The U.S. military is completely built around forward operating bases. The whole idea is you fight the war over there so you don't have to fight it here. But if over there suddenly says no shooting, your strategy collapses.
It honestly reminds me of paying for a premium gym membership, but only being allowed to use the water fountain. You're technically inside the building, but you aren't doing any work.
And you're paying an absolute fortune for the privilege of standing there.
Seriously, it costs billions of taxpayer dollars to maintain these deployments year after year.
And that is the final thought Delgen leaves us with. If this trend continues, if we really are in a new multipolar world where smaller allies can just say no to Washington, does the U.S. keep paying the rent?
It's the sunk cost fallacy on a geopolitical scale.
Precisely. Washington has to ask itself a very uncomfortable question. What is the point of a forward base if it's just a glorified storage locker? If you can't launch sorties from Al Dhafra when the chips are down, does Al Dhafra actually have strategic value anymore? Or is it just a massive target that ties down American resources?
And if the answer is no, do we start to see a U.S. retreat?
I think we might. Not a total withdrawal overnight, but definitely a dispersion. Moving assets to safer, more reliable places, relying a lot more on long-range bombers from Diego Garcia or even the U.S. mainland, and definitely relying more on the Navy. But the era of the U.S. having a permanent, unquestioned footprint on the Arabian Peninsula, that era might be closing.
It's a very sobering thought to leave you with. We always tend to think of power as hardware. How many missiles do you have? How many jets are on the tarmac? But this deep dive really shows that power is actually software. It's relationships. It's political permission. And right now, the software is crashing.
I couldn't have said it better myself. The hardware is useless without the operating system.
Suat Dilgen's analysis is a must-read for anyone tracking the shifting sands in the Middle East. As always, we impartially report on these sources to give you the lay of the land, regardless of the politics involved. So we highly recommend you check out the source material yourself to explore the fine print of these DCA agreements.
It is definitely worth your time.
Thanks for taking the plunge with us today.
Always a pleasure to be here.
We will catch you on the next Deep Dive.